and then below that is all my, like, you get the thumbnails. And just mattrotasart.com. You can go and scroll through and see all the different clients I've worked with over the years. So I've been doing this, now since 2006 is probably the first real thing I got published. So it's, been many years. So lots of different clients. My work has kind of stayed very similar. Some of the early work I did, I still have on here. It's in the op-ed section right here. A lot of this black and white pen and ink stuff is still similar to what I do, but it also is kind of at the root where I got started. This was the first sort of, not the literal first piece I ever got printed in illustration, but it's damn near, one of the first, but it kind of marks, it's the first time I worked for the New York Times. And I feel like I always use that as like the start of my career. Kind of the first piece I felt like I did that is the style and would be the style that I'd work in. Kind of.
Is it cropped there, or is it just not showing the whole image?
No, it's cropped there. Those were the dimensions, and I cropped it. I cropped it in a little tightly, so you'd have this big, intense round shape at the bottom, kind of, and it would be about the same size as the full figure with the person behind it. But I think with this one, it kind of gets to the heart of some of the stuff that you talk about, Josh, when you talk about drawing. So it's not a bad starting place. The article was on, so it was in 2006, and the article, by the way, this was for the op-ed on the New York Times, and that's like the shortest deadline that there is in the industry. They give you a call in the afternoon and they want the final the next day or something like that. It's like today, like if I got a call from them today, it would be like at 10 in the morning, and they'd want sketches by noon and the final by 8. This was a little bit longer. I had a day to do the sketches and then the final due the next morning. Anyway, so it's really quick and it's a lot of pressure, and it goes, it's the biggest illustration piece in print kind of in the country, or maybe even in the world per day. So I hadn't, the piece was on voting. Essentially, it's at the core of it. It was about elections in Haiti. Voting is not a very exciting thing to draw. It doesn't make for like a good visual if you have a bunch of people just lined up outside of voting booths. And plus, I've never been to Haiti. I don't know what voting looks like there. There's a lot of stuff that's in the way of me just doing a very straightforward drawing of this subject. But when I read it, sort of at the heart of it, I kind of ask myself, like, what is interesting? Why are they publishing the article? Like, it is an interesting article. What's driving it? And it's sort of the historical anxiety over politics and elections in Haiti and the history of other countries intervening, and so all of these sort of insecurities and historical anxieties. So it's like, I know that my piece has to have that. That was probably why the art director called me, to make an image like that. So I have to embed that in the piece. So instead of going for something where I'm thinking conceptually, smashing two symbols together to create, conceptual narrative that you see a lot in editorial, I went for something psychological. I wanted to capture the doubt and anxiety of one person, which is like the big head. This, in its big head, it's like big thinking energy. Up close, kind of like pushing at the borders of the frame. So it's a little claustrophobic, and it has all these things going for it that make it intense. And then behind it, you have the figure that's looking in the other direction. And so the concept is two different directions, which is looking to the past and being anxious, and looking to the future and being optimistic. And I use very delicate lines on the figure. Things that, and it's like this contrast. So I'm building a narrative with figures and body language, but I'm also building a language with mark making and the line weight and contrasts and more elemental bits with the illustration. I didn't know if the art directors would go for that. I didn't know if that would be, if this was too vague, or if it was too suggestive but didn't actually tell the illustration, tell the story that the illustration needed. But the art director really liked it, and they, I I think it got some attention, like it got one of the best, like best of New York Times op-ed illustrations for the year and stuff. So it sort of became the way that I thought about illustration, or at least I knew that like I could approach illustration through creating psychology in the drawing itself, and that the drawing could be the concepts, that you could convey messages in a story, in a feeling, through how you tackle the style of drawing, more so than just staging a narrative and telling a literal story. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
you were how old when you did this?
I was 3 years out of undergrad. I graduated undergrad in 2003, so I would have been 20. I would have been 25. Yeah.
25, and
Yeah.
you're using the skills that you got from school. This is pen and ink.
Yep.
And talk a little bit about everybody noticed that the sticks in the background sticking out of the sand. So I'm trying to encourage people to get away from the habit of having the horizon line too straight. So that horizon line appears straight, but it's just a little bit angled.
Yeah. And it's not really, and it's not even necessarily a horizon line, because like we believe, we sort of know, we sense a horizon line through it, but
Right.
We sort of intuit it, but I didn't actually put it there too. So I get to slant it, I get to bend it a little bit, and yeah.
Yeah, I sometimes get a little blurry on the definition of a horizon line. Like if you're talking about a horizon line at the edge of a landscape, I don't know. I mean, if it's foggy, the horizon line, there's the edge of the world that you can see, and then there might be an actual horizon line beyond that, but it's not apparent in the image. And that sometimes I feel like it's a semantics argument.
Sure. I think it's there as a sense of like, because it was used so much as a sense of design since the Renaissance, that we intuit the need for it in design. And so it doesn't literally need to be there, but it certainly helps to stabilize a piece. And I think makes us feel comfortable, or, because we're so historically used to it.
Cool.
Yeah. So do you have any other questions on this one?
No, keep on going. I want to point out I'm already seeing the signs of these intricate backgrounds that you do. And ones are very off key. And
one thing I will say,
we'll see more of that as you go. Keep on going.
One more thing I'll say about this is that I actually didn't draw it all on one sheet of paper. I was so nervous that I did the pencil sketch, and then I did the different bits and pieces on different pieces of paper, and then scan them, put them together, so that if I messed up one part of it, I didn't mess up the entire thing. So it's actually a composite. So the digital composite of a bunch of different drawings. So yeah, and then these are some early ones that I was doing. That was kind of, I hadn't started using color yet, and I was a little bit nervous too. And I'd sort of gotten work at the times to begin with, just by sending in sketches to Brian Ray, who's an artist that has a real sketchy style. He was a teacher of mine. And
what's his name?
Brian Ray, Rhea. You must know his work. He REA is his last name, and he did the Modern Love column forever on the New York Times. He was did those little almost like ballpoint pen stick figure type drawings that are real scratchy but very beautiful. Really good. Anyways, he was my teacher in undergrad, and he was the art director that was working there at the time. And so he was, I was sending him sort of like these little scratchy sketches and stuff like that, and he was really into that. So but I wasn't, because I was doing this kind of work. It's very niche in a way, because there's not many magazines that just publish black and white, especially when they're sort of politically themed. That a lot of people like that, but there's not a big market for that, So this, I felt like I needed to go to grad school, because I had a fine arts degree, and I didn't really know what I was doing in the illustration world business wise, but I had a sense that I could make it work. So I ended up going to SVA, the program that we both went to, Josh, where we know each other from. And that's how I ended up at the SVA program. just almost like in the same year as I started getting my first illustration jobs. And I don't have necessarily I started to experiment a lot with different techniques, different digital techniques. Like this was a job where I hadn't quite found yet how I like to color pieces. I was what I was trying to do was keep what I liked, what was loose about my pen and ink drawings, but find a way to insert color in there. And so it was sort of this balance of not completely finishing the drawings as much as I was used to. So there was still space to put color and a place that didn't feel like it was cluttering the drawing. So I would take my pencil drawings where my sketches were coming from. Which I can show you those. I can actually show you some of these drawings a little bit later. And I would break those down into different little bits and pieces. So like some of these are up top, a lot of these are pen and ink. But some of these you'll see combine things like I'll paint the whole background in gouache and I'll do some of the drawing in pencil. I'm interpreting all the drawing in different materials and then stitching it back together. Like this one, like the background is all done in pencil drawing. All the color is done with gouache. Everything is, there's no original drawing. Everything is done on bits and pieces of tracing paper. And I'm kind of like reconstructing the pencil drawing with the different types of drawing and painting and digital compositing. That was really fun, but it was also very, very time consuming. And it took me away from, I was sort of losing the core of what I thought was interesting, which was just the straightforward pen and ink drawing. So I did that for a few years and I started to get a lot more work. But it was such a time consuming process that I started to strip everything back down to just real basics. But I can show you some of that from that time, like some of the ones that I like. This was a fun one. This was a story for the New York Times Book Review about a woman who lost her brother in Vietnam, I think. But this was one where I took the sketch and then I printed it out and I traced it. I transferred the pencil sketch onto watercolor paper. And then I did a watercolor background. And then I took vellum tracing paper and put it on top of the pencil drawing and did an ink drawing. And then I did a few layers of shading on tracing paper that you kind of see on these figures. And I put it all together. And I always liked, I could have, now I would probably be capable of painting this. But back then I was a little too, I didn't know how to get the actual materials to make these kinds of colors. But I felt like the fusion here of these flat colors painted in the background with the ink drawing worked out really well. And these were the kind of combinations, kind of contrast that I was going for then. But sometimes it would just get a little too sloppy and I couldn't quite figure out the right combination of things. And so trying to go in chronological order to show you sort of how my process evolved. And there's sort of like these key pieces along the way where I would, like I would do something and it would click and that would sort of guide the way that my whole process would go from there on out for the next few years. This was a pretty wild process. This one is, I took I took a reference photo of somebody's head. I put it into a program in called Text Edit, and it opened the code for the JPEG. And I started to damage the code and to make glitch art. And then I made a photo that looked like this. And then I traced the photo and separated into like 5 different layers of value and painted all the background in gouache. This probably has 20 different layers of drawing that were all put together. And then I sort of like recreated the glitch art over many different layers and then drew this figure in the foreground. This took way much longer than it was worth for what I was getting paid for. It was a lot of fun. This was for Vice magazine and they only pay something like $200 or $300 for a piece like this. I probably spent 20 hours on it. This was one where I started to get like really simple again, like all of the digital effects, digital compositing, all of that kind of, I felt like was getting like overworked and cluttered. So I really, you can see how I kind of stripped everything out, just right down to just flat colors in the drawing.
It,
Um,
it's a great example of something which is mostly thin line.
Yep.
And then you have just a few isolated thick lines. That hand on the right is so contrasty.
yeah, this was one where I had separated a lot more colors. And then I just deleted all of them. And the more I got rid of, the more I realized like it could get away with just like little hits of color here and there.
Love it.
Yeah. And so, and I also had been sort of, because I had been so worried about messing up my drawings, I had been working on all these different layers, and I missed sort of just having original drawings again. So I went back and just started to work on one sheet of paper, just like, again, no compositing drawings, no tricks, nothing, one sheet of paper, add digital layers. These colors I was doing on tracing paper, though. I was doing black ink on tracing paper, and I would scan that and digitize it and turn it into a color. So they have a little bit of there's little like accidents that happen where the color spills out from the line work, and it gives it a bit more of a handmade feeling, or you get moments of like some of the texture that show through on the face here, because it's not perfectly filled in digitally. These are some of the things that I like about working in that process. So this was a Washington Post. This was a great story about how the Vatican has priests that are ordained to verify whether or not somebody is actually possessed by a demon before they send an exorcist. And that person is a trained scientist. They're not, I mean, they're a priest, but they have to have a degree, in science as well, so that they can rule out whether or not it's mental illness or actual demonic possession.
Wow.
So that was a good story. It's a fun one to work on. But yeah, and then since then it's just been I kind of built on that and have begun adding more textures, and even sometimes going back and adding some elements of collage and things like that into the drawings. This was one. This was a series I did on the trials of ISIS in Iraq. This was an interesting one because I get sort of like waves of topics that are popular, and the news sort of runs in cycles where if something's happening in the world, it'll be like that and 10 other stories that all of the magazines are writing about. And so different points in my career, I've had waves of different subjects. There was a while where I was doing prison reform all the time, just like a lot of people were writing about prison reform, and I happened to be one of the artists that were doing articles on that. But when ISIS was defeated, I guess, in Iraq, and then they were put on trial. And several years ago, there was no cameras allowed in the courtroom. And so I was contacted by several different magazines to do drawings of what the courtroom trials looked like. And this was for Die Zeit magazine, the German Times magazine, essentially. And I was talking with a journalist. So I get up early in the morning, and the journalist was in Baghdad, and it was late at night there, because that must be like 10 hours, 10, yeah, probably 10 to 12 hours ahead of us in New York. And he'd spent the day in trial, and then he'd be sitting in his hotel room in Baghdad with the lights off and the hotel and a bulletproof vest on, and he would call me. We would do FaceTime, and he'd call me and describe the courtroom, and he'd sort of describe these different scenes, and I'd have to sit there and he'd have reference that he'd show me, kind of, that he would have not gotten from the courtroom but looked up online, and he'd sort of talk me through some of it, and then he'd describe the scene he wanted, and I'd have to sit there and sketch it and hold it up in front of him, and he'll know, move this guy over here, move this person over here, there should be 2 people over there should be like another da 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 da. And so like I was sort of making these scenes up that are from real life, that are these things that are really happening, but through somebody else's firsthand account descriptions of them.
No
And
picture. He couldn't take a photo and show it
no,
to you.
no,
And
no.
you just do your best to
Yeah.
would you Google
You,
judges podiums?
yeah, there's some things that they sent that are generic, some sort of generic interiors of the courtrooms, in Iraq, and like certain things like the scarves they wear around their necks, and what he looks like. They sort of gave me a physical description of the judge as well. So it gets, the wooden cage, the flag to the left. Those were all things that they're kind of telling me. And then the style, the little things like, sometimes these are what really drive it home, the little things like the texture on the side of you know, what the banisters look like, the woodworking, the
I love
panels
it.
here.
Yeah.
Those are things that I did find that are actual details in courtrooms. So that brings it to life, it makes it more than just like a box that they're standing in front of. So you can find stuff like that and kind of attach it to it. There's some flexibility, it can
And
still,
I see there's a skylight too. It's subtle, but you can
yeah,
see it.
yeah, just a little cool, right? A little cool light in the middle of all the warm heat down here. Yeah. And these were interesting ones. Like they gave me reference for this guy and then I drew him, but then they told me I couldn't make him look too much like him, which is the first time I got that, because he was an informant. And when they broke the story, like they were worried that like my drawing of him would look too much like him, and that they'd find out who was one of the informants on the stories and he'd get in trouble. So
Yeah.
I'd like shave his face and like change it so it didn't look like him. Yeah. And this we had reference for because it was outside. This was the front of the courtroom.
That one's so interesting. It's slightly off center. That black door is
Yeah.
just barely off the middle line.
Yeah. 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 It's all like a tiny bit off.
Can you pick another one that has very specific architecture in it? That's one of the things, the challenge of doing scaffolding and intricate interweaving architectural shapes. It's something that I'm amazed at how well you can do it, and I want to hear you talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah. I mean, there's plenty with architecture. What are some
One motorcycle, maybe?
you like the one with the motorcycle down here?
Yeah, let's try that one.
Yeah, that's a good one actually for architecture to talk about too. There's good stories here. This was for
Wow.
this is for a magazine called In These Times. This is actually a similar story to what I was mentioning before, but this is a very like left-wing political magazine, and they get grants. They get grants to work on projects. So when they get a grant for a particular story, a lot of times I'll get called to do a whole series for them. And this was about bombings that were happening in Somalia. And this was during the Trump administration. What had happened was the president had allowed the CIA to there's a lot of background to it, so it's a little complicated, but essentially like the US historically has problems gaining intel into the terrorist organizations in Somalia, right? But they know that they operate there. And Trump had loosened the standards by which the CIA needed evidence and data before dropping bombs to kill military combatants in the country. And along with that, they didn't need governmental oversight. They didn't need the president's okay. They were free to operate in Somalia however they wanted to. So they were like not gathering information and dropping a lot of bombs. That was making people mad, as you can imagine. And so that's what this story was about. But because it's on a grant, like they're getting this grant to do this, and they're essentially writing an article that's attacking the US government, facts are really important. This was another one where we were all in meetings and one of the reporters was in Somalia and we were doing FaceTime meetings and talking about the questions and really going over the details and the architecture. And this was one where it was like I was looking up a lot of pictures of marketplaces in Somalia. And in Mogadishu, they have a lot of tables that they're selling vegetables on in the streets. And that was wrong. I had to redraw that because in the towns where she was, it was all like on carpets on the floor. So like every little detail was important because for instance, this explosion, this cloud is they had to send me specific reference to that because I had drawn the smoke from an explosion from a bomb that the CIA doesn't use on Somalians. So if it came out, like the issue came out and they're saying all this stuff about the US government, the government could say like, oh, well, that's a drawing of a bomb that we don't use. That's factually incorrect. So we had to get all of that right in the drawings.
How do bombs look different?
Different bombs have different cloud shapes depending on the force of the explosion and the type of the explosion. And this had a specific shape to it. I had to get it right. Yeah, it's weird. It was very, yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Not something I would have thought of, not something that I would even think, but the journalist came back with a lot of great corrections. But the trick is with that too. So it's like somebody comes back with all of that, and I can't lose sight of the fact that like I like to draw things loosely, and it's like I sort of like to be a little bit messy with stuff. So I have to be like really specific, but I can't draw tightly. I can't like come in and be like a super tightly rendered artist because it's just not what I do. And so there's a fine line between being accurate and correct and all this stuff, all of the headwear that they have on this was Al Shabaab. They had to be very specific. The bands had to be specific, the kind of motorcycles they ride, but I had to make them look like how I would draw them too. And so it was fun. It was a really fun assignment. It was a very tricky one to get it right. But in terms of the architecture, what are you curious about? What are your thoughts?
Can you zoom in a little bit?
Yeah.
On the background, especially.
Yeah.
So just, this looks really fun to draw. I mean, depressing because the materials are so shoddy, but the corrugated roof, putting aside the perspective, because that's going to be a lesson we haven't even gotten into yet. Foreshortening a perspective when it comes to these buildings is something I want these kids to know like the back of their hands, but it's going to take getting the same type of instruction that you and I got. But putting that aside, we're also talking about the shapes of things. One of the notes that I give students is do 2 lines whenever possible. So when I look at the rim of the open hatch on the van, when I look at the roof in the background, when I especially those spindly supports that are going up and supporting the ceiling of the roof of the side of the roof, those are all double lines, especially those sticks, because they're so thin. If you did do them with 2 lines, it would completely lose their sense of being, having substance.
Yeah, no, they're all back in space for sure. Yeah.
So it's some of those tips, some of the, it is really interesting how there's places where you're clearly reducing things to a raw scribble that in other hands could threaten to fall apart. And it's finding that balance, isn't it? Between being specific and allowing yourself to know when it's okay to sketch.
Yeah. Well, the simple answer to that is that if you need something to be clear, you have to draw it very clearly. So like those are like but it's everything when it comes to like the apples and the oranges and the bananas and stuff. What I do, and what I do for everything is I think of that like I'm going to draw a pattern, and I have to create a mark that I can just repeat over and over and over again. So it's like this melon here has to look different than the chestnuts or the oranges. Everything, like they can't all look just like the similar round shape, but also they can't be over rendered because then it would kill the looseness and the energy. So I just try to find like, what's the mark for the banana? What's the mark for the melons? This or that thing. And so you kind of develop this little quick shorthand well marked to fill that in. And I do that for the trees and the leaves and things. And so the trees kind of are almost like background noise, little bits of energy, kind of explosions of things. So I get to be a little bit looser. They help move your eye around. They serve other purposes. But this has to be like sharp, because like you need you to see like that information. That information is crucial to the story. In terms of perspective, though, there's a few points that I want to make here. I don't know why it's seems like it's frozen. There we go. Oh, what I want.
I go through this a million times in doing Zoom classes.
Yeah, there we go. When I'm thinking of perspective, so you'll notice like this street goes higher, this street doesn't, like it's, it's not an even perspective, it's not accurate. And I had a teacher once tell me, really point out something really great in like a Renaissance painting. There are all these things that are supposed to be perfect and that we kind of hold in high esteem and all that. He sort of was like, look, this artist doesn't, he messed up. It's the wrong perspective. But then he's like, but he didn't really mess up, because what he's doing is, he's like, perspective only works if it's kind of showing you something, if it's being used as a surface to reveal the story on it. And if like it's getting in the way of that, then it's not really working very well. And so he sort of showed us that it's like you follow it realistically as long as it helps to tell the story. But I do a lot of guesswork. Like I need, I have all these little compositions in here. This little pole here, these poles section off the composition scenes. And so like the perspective has to work to create enough space so that these little windows show you moments in time that give you bits of information into the story, and that's kind of how I think about perspective. Like I know how it diminishes, but I'm only gonna like diminish it in space to a point, and it makes sure that it still creates these little scenes, these areas and spaces where I can illuminate scenes, within the composition. So I stretch it, I manipulate it, I tilt it up, I'll raise the horizon line to tilt it up higher. So in a case like this, we get a longer street. And so we get to see more of the women, the kids, the humanity on the street. We get more of that story, which is important. You get these men who are militants, but then you get these everyday men who are just like going to work. And that's an important, you want to see these comparisons. You kind of want to get these different stories to get the full feeling of it in. And so the perspective is being used to show that and to give space, to create like a space to kind of showcase stories. And so I fake it. I try to adhere to it in the sense that like there is space. There's a vanishing point, but I use it very elastically, very much to also just like create little windows. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
cool. So yeah, other things in here I think that are important. Like I had to get a lot of information in here, so I had to use a really thin line. And I couldn't use shading because I had a lot of like these little fruits had to be super clear. So it's like thin line, not a lot of detail on them. So because it's cluttered already, I'm not going to clutter it more with too many textures, too many shadows, too many things are going to block it. So all of this, my choice of pen and everything is sort of to have high definition, high detail, but with not a lot of like cluttering. And the same back here, real fine pen to get all the details in. Using a little bit of shading, but a lot of open shapes. And then things in the foreground, I use a heavier mark. It's a different tool. I use the differences like between
and I've been really fast. Oh, I see.
Yeah, like I like my heavier marks. I might use a fat one like that, that it's like a flat on the top and wide. A thin line, but like a bolder one is this, it's this particular brand I'm using is a Korean brand, I believe. It's very, very good, better than the American ones. It's this is these are the best nibs, that brand. I don't actually know what the brand name is, but that's what is on the tip of this one here. Different tip, but same company. And then the smallest one that I use is for like the fine lines. So this, a couple small ones. Another one in between, but this one is like the smallest of the small, and that's like a hair thin line. And so that's one that if like I need like really fine details in the background like this, I might just use that really fine pen. You know, when I'm drawing these heavier lines here on him in the foreground and the bike, I'm using like the second of the two. I'm gonna use like this wider one. And then when I want marks like the heavy tires, the heavy darkness on the tires, the thick marks around his legs, maybe things like that, I might use brush tools similar to that one, but similar to like the really fat wide clip. So
yeah, I was really interested the last time you talked about showing examples of ones where you introduced medium lines as we went further back and thin lines as we went more forward. Can you
yeah,
show
we have the one that we talked about the last time, the one that you're talking about, I know that specifically is this series here. It was this one.
that one? Yeah. It's
Yeah.
kind of hard to tell.
Yeah, because this is a few different like you know, as I'm doing it, I'm also like in my mind, I kind of know how I'm going to color it, you know. So and sometimes it doesn't always work out so nicely, but sometimes you just get an idea and it all figures itself out before you even do it. So, you know, when you go to the drawing, you already know, anticipate how you're going to color it. And this is one, the whole piece was about these concentration camps. Well, what are the detention centers, the refugee camps for the Syrian refugees that are being held in places like Lebanon and in Turkey, and how they really wanted the sense of how dense these camps are, and they really are. I mean, they're vast. So to break that up, it's like this would start to feel very flat if I'm just using that one pen, you know, that one like thin pen. It's just going to be a lot of similar information. What makes, you know, any drawing exciting is contrast. You know, two different types of line weights, two different types of textures. You know, having cross hatching next to stippling, next to outlines. That's will always kind of, so my strategy here is to kind of find like, well, where's the contrast? How am I going to break this big chunk of information up? I like when you see how clouds sort of pass over and cast light on certain areas and then leave other areas, and you get these strips of like shadows and things that break space up really nicely, and rolling hills and things. So I kind of thought that would be how I'd break this up. And I knew in the foreground, you know, that's like you're saying, Josh, a lot of double lines, a lot of like the things that the window has the double line around it. The edges have, you know, these seams have like double lines, the light bulbs. So I'm using thinner lines here, but I'm also using heavier lines too in the foreground. You know, it's like I have some of my thinnest lines are here, but they're next to these dark solid shapes and these double lines and these heavier marks. So there's more contrast, even though there's thinner lines in the foreground, there's more contrast. And that's what kind of your eye goes to that. You start to see like, oh, the little water bottles, the corrugated metal, all of that's real fine detail stuff. And I, you know, engineered it so that what you look at first is that middle strip, this strip right here, not the people, not anything else. You kind of go right in here. Then you kind of come down, you look at the people maybe, then you go up into space. But so if I want to push this further back in space, I could have just jumped to where the yellow is, because the yellow is sort of like the same thin lines, but it's just outline. You know, there's no double lines, there's no heavy line weight, there's not really a lot of texture. a super light version of this, but instead I kind of switched it to like a heavier pen. But I used a consistent line weight. So it just makes it look like it's cast in shadow. So it doesn't look like the same amount of detail. I where there is a lot of double lines, these little stripes, little satellites here, when it jumps here, the line weight's pretty consistent and it's consistently heavy. So it does push it back in space, but it makes it feel like it's in shadow. So I put a darker color there and then switch again to just light outlines.
It must be really, it's kind of really cathartic for the image and maybe for you as an artist to be able to do these little these scenes of human drama in the foreground after doing so much dense cityscaping.
Yeah, I love it. I really, because I feel like that's sort of the finishing touches where it brings it to life. And I have a lot, I mean, I just enjoy drawing people anyways. So it's fun to kind of sprinkle little moments and vignettes throughout here. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your use of color? I know that you, in your early stuff, you said that you weren't confident in your color prowess. And do you want to talk a little bit about your philosophy of color?
Yeah, well, I think I was, I was trained in more like, like I had studied fine art and painting and all of that stuff. So I had a great background in painting, but it was very observational painting, very academic. And so it was like standing in a field and painting a landscape, or like getting a model to sit for you and paint that. So when you get into that kind of color, what painters like that tend to get obsessed with are like the subtle differences in flesh tones, these like really interesting expressive capabilities where you start to distort colors and things. But in the end, it really is kind of coming from this, much more observational world. And so when I would, my drawing style is a bit more expressive than a neutral and realistic color palette. Like when I would go to color mine, I would have these, these wild sketchy sketches, right? And then I would be like painting blue sky, green grass, all these things. And that might look accurate, but it never felt right with the drawing. It didn't have the color wasn't energized the same way the drawing was. And so in a way, it was like containing it, or they were working against each other. And I had a hard time really breaking out of thinking about colors in such a realistic, ordinary way. And having the goal that I use with my colors being to like find some interesting way to capture observational color. And what broke me away from that was I had been, my first job out of college was a comic book coloring assistant. So I learned how to use Photoshop, and I was working with a comic book colorist, and we were doing just flat colors on a lot of different styles of drawing. And that really got me to think, and I wasn't, no reference or anything like that. So I was just kind of learning how to make color work based on color theory and how colors, like just in an abstract way, can look good together. And I, a lot of the artwork as well. I mean, when I was out of school and undergrad, I think there was a lot of artists like James Jean and Tomer Hanukkah and people that were also really kind of pushing Photoshop coloring a lot, and the freedom that you have with how bold, and I think also that the thing is that right around the mid to early 2000s, the first online publications were coming out, and usually, so when you're using color in the 90s and before, your colors are for print, and that's CMYK, it's process colors, all right, which are generally muted. CMYK colors and magazine colors are always much more muted than digital colors, because the way that CMYK works is a darkening layered process of transparent colors. Your screen is RGB and the light comes from behind it, so the colors are super vibrant. And like people were doing, like James Jean and stuff, everyone was only looking at his work online. And so you'd get, he was one of the artists that was popularizing digital coloring, and people would be seeing it on screen. So you'd get these great pinks and magentas and things that we never actually saw in print. But I think that those colors really affected the way that I and a lot of other people were sort of thinking about what you could do with digital colors. And so I started to, the process I got to was to no longer use reference. The long story short was to use reference from my drawing, everything realistic. And then, but instead of looking at people like Tomer and James, I went back and looked at old illustration from Germany in the 1920s. And there's all of this great stuff during the Weimar Republic, like Carl Arnold and I'm totally blanking on the names. They worked for magazines like Simplicissimus and Der Spiegel, and they are all political leftists and beautiful drawing. Really, like, all of them were amazing draftsmen, and they were limited to these simple colors, but they really did wonderful things with the minimal color palettes. And when I showed you the piece, the Washington Post piece, if we're looking back at the Exorcist one, and when I said I sort of kind of felt like I connected with something, this was like looking back at how simple the colors were being done in those illustrations from the 1920s. And people, and I'll show you some of the artists that I mean, like Edward Thorney, for instance, is a really good example. He was a German illustrator. I think he worked
in terms of the color. Yeah.
What's that?
In terms of the color, flat. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I love his drawing, but the colors, were something I was really getting a lot out of. There is Carl Arnold is another one who's really had a great, like, super simple, very weird color style. For how limited it was at the time. So these kind of things, anyways, I was looking back, and then I like it too because it emphasizes the drawing so much. There's a few other artists that are maybe a bit better as well that I like, but I'm just blanking on their names right now. But it was like, this magazine was like a golden era of just like phenomenal. It was like a political leftist, anti-fascist magazine during the rise of the Nazis, and they just had the best illustration.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
What we should wrap up, because I'm going to spend the last hour just giving students a lesson. Some of it really very much connected to what I see in your work. Okay. Students, do you have any questions? Is there anything which you're dying to know from Matt?
It can be professional, it can be creative.
可以问一下，我觉得不太好。你真的可以问一下。我觉得不太好。
They're hesitating to ask. So thank you, Matthew. It's really nice. And I'm asking one question, maybe on behalf of the students.
Please,
I think when at early stage, they are very hesitating, or every time when there's a deadline to post something or present something, maybe the work is not yet done. I think for your case, it's every time there's a very harsh deadline to finish the work and share with the journalist side, right? So how you deal with this situation if the work needs to be submitted and it's not yet that's finished yet?
Well, it's a good question, and it's an important one. And I think it's something that you only get used to over time. But it's like there's like different levels of finish, and you start to realize that, and you start to realize that you're also working with art directors that understand that. So it's like, if I have a deadline that's 2 hours or 5 hours or whatever, they expect good work from me, but they also have realistic expectations about what that means. And I know what I can do in a short amount of time, and I know what I can't do in a short amount of time. And so I'm gonna, like, I have enough experience now where, like, I'm gonna just go for the thing I know I can do that's reliable in those 2 hours. And it'll be a drawing style that looks good when done quickly and is enough. But the professional thing that everyone comes to is that not every piece is a masterpiece, and it's unprofessional to actually treat something like you need more time on it. Sort of like when those hours are up, you hand in what's there and that's done. That's it. That's, you know, the best it can be in that amount of time. And that's okay. You know, that's part of the job. So part of the
Thank
fun
you.
of it. Yeah.
Yes.
Anybody else?
They're in a huddle right now.
Got it.
I think we ended up talking about some of this last time you were here, Matt. And I think I might have, because this kind of leads to that one story that Durf had. Did I tell you about that? It was like an early edit when he was doing editorial,
I don't know.
where
Yeah.
there's a mix up, and it was back in the early days, and he was doing this beautiful wall. I don't even know what to compare it to, but it looked more like social realist work than what we know of Durf now. And
Okay.
it was an image about tearing down the wall of division between the races. So there were like, it was like a white man kind of heroically tearing down bricks on one side and a black face on the other side. And he basically got a call there on the way over. He was doing this beautiful work, and they're on their way over to pick it up. And he was etching away these bricks, almost like a scratch board technique. And he had to turn it in with a bunch of kind of contoured white graphic bricks where he intended to render every one. And it's just a magnificent piece, and it was an accident. And he'll always regret that he didn't get really take it to the end. But it was, I thought it was kind of just as good, well off for the piece that he had that limitation.
Yeah, no, and you kind of learn how to make those things work, make those bold decisions when you don't have the time to do anything else. That's what happens.
Another thing that came to mind when you were talking about trying to piece together an image of what that courtroom looked like, you know what I found out reading about Jack Kirby, who I know we're both fans of, his job when he was in the infantry was, I'd always understood that he had one job, but he had a different one that I thought. He was kind of a human Polaroid camera. They would bomb cities and not have swept them. And he would go ahead, and he could draw so quickly that he would draw the cities and what he saw, and then come back and discuss, this is a state of the city, and I did or I didn't see any evidence of enemy activity here.
Yeah.
And in the course of he would go off alone. So there's a story of Jack Kirby ending up basically swinging open some doors to what used to be a swank hotel, and finding a nest of the elite SS officers in there. And that actually leads into a really interesting story about one of his biggest war traumas, where he really discreetly would not talk about it, but they ended up taking him hostage. And according to his son, he wouldn't tell the story publicly, but the family lore was that he got a dagger away from them, killed one of them, used his gun, and shot the others. But that part of it's amazing and so heroic on Kirby's part.
Sure.
But he was also, just that he was a human Polaroid camera is just an amazing thing to conceive.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, makes sense too.
Everybody, it's 11. Matt, thank you so much. As usual, as every time you come, I appreciate it, and I get so much out of it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
And students, let's take a 10-minute break. We'll come back in 10 minutes, and thank you all so much for your rapt attention.
Did you ask questions, Dixie?
No.
Why not?
I'm fine.
You're fine?
Okay. Are we good?
I have another question.
Yep, Matt, thank you so much.
Okay.
All right, everybody, we're all going to take a 10-minute break.
See you later, John.
Cool.
All right, I'll see you,
Good
John.
night, Matt. Thank you.
Yeah, man.
叫人谁懂啊？这真的刚刚说要结束了呀？不是我胡说呀，
你说好，
应该延迟一下，应该延迟到休息。
里面除了
我在里面作画，
有一次是失败的，
不是他真的说要结束了呀？不是吗？不说呀，讲完了呀，讲完了呀，
解释也是 understandable。
我
我
What is understandable？讲不动了
understandable。
，dreadable。
We really need your little cart right now,
What did you call it？
like the food cart.
这口的哈，我也是，来，接点水。太不容易。
哎呦，我说对了。
太接了，我也是。
浪费。
我怎么真的要结束了？我刚才准备解放了，真的被看着了。
怪我了。
对啊，
不要再说。你呢？
我都帮你。谁做的？
我距离酒店。
我你报来。你快就你 translation 的，我们talking about。
我这个。
I'm translator today. No translator.
好笑了。
Why are you all laughing？
没有，我在
我唱完一口水，不在吵架，要命！
好想笑。
不能再笑了，都笑得岔气儿了，不能再笑了。
我感觉我要减肥了，我笑的气都没了。
我真的自己要笑出来了。哎呀，我抓不回去了。 这是谁懂了？
我还听点优越的东西。
播放一下吧，我看过一个
Got it. Cool. So I'm recording now, and what the point that we're at is I'm just talking about construction, and I'm talking about these two rectangles. And what I'm saying is that you can take a rectangle and another rectangle and a wedge, and the wedge goes here, and another one goes here. So yes, I'm kind of making a cage of shapes, but hopefully you can see through it. And if you get confused and you're drawing on paper, you could draw different colors. If this becomes a little bit easier to see if I use a green, and if I make the wedge a purple, then that's easy to see as well. And what this is going to become is an old-fashioned car.
多表情包。
So over this, I'm going to draw this.
好难受，不是我听说我跟你比的喜欢，不要发了，不要不然就特别搞笑。
You use the box as a guide and then draw these windows over it and the edge of this car here, and then the back of the car, the back of the window here. And we start to get a kind of a classic car. Meaning that cars used to be shaped very square. And now they're not, but I like to draw them square and then kind of transform them into new cars. And I'll show you how to do that. Now, the wheel goes up into the body of the car like this and like this. And there's a certain placement. You know, you don't usually have it here. No, it's not going to be underneath the window. That looks ridiculous. It doesn't run into the door. So it's got to be a little bit away from the door and not quite to the headlight right there. And then the other one will be here. And as you can see, to get the perfect wheel, you want to draw it as a square and then turn it into a wheel. Have any of you ever done this before? This is a very sound architectural kind of technique. So you can see, I'm almost doing this. It's got to be straight, but as I'm rushing it, I'm making the shapes a little bit crooked. If this is the cab of the car, I'm going to make this a little bit longer, then this line and this line and this line and this line line up with each other. For now, we're not doing this. We can do this later. After we get the basics. So we're not doing, this is good to know how to do, but we're not doing this yet. So for now, you're going to make the lines very parallel. Notice that this line, all the lines are going this way. That's the edge of the trunk, the edge of the roof, the front of the roof, the bottom of the window, the top of the hood, or the I'll just say hood. I can't think of what the other word is called. The bumper. They're all the same direction. And that's what we're going to do for now. Then notice that the bottom of the side, the top of the door, the edge of the roof and the other edge of the roof, they're also going the same direction, as is the trunk. So if you do that, see, all these lines are going the same way, and all of these lines are going the same way. Then you'll be able to carve a car out of this. And I don't want to confuse the issue, but just to show you another technique of something that you can build out of a brick, you can also do this. And then cut away a shape. And now I've got a couch. So it's almost like you can use the rectangle to draw a lot of shapes. So knowing how to do these kinds of shapes is going to be really good for your work. Now I've got a whole piece of convincing furniture these characters can use. And if the car is the same way. There's the hood. I like to do this. Just an arch and a grill. And then we have a pretty decent car. Now, depending on who you are, you might be satisfied drawing a car that looks like this. And this is how I learned how to draw cars. And I'm going to go in carefully and add a double line and another double line. And then a line on the hood. And the side of it. And the other side. And maybe a little bit of the seats on the inside. And even with this, I might go and add some of the seams on the seats, connect all my lines like we do with a contour drawing. And then finally, this is the hardest part, trying to get in there and get that door. Now, I don't want to go too fast, but what you can also do is eventually you can use the system. So you block out a car. So this classic car, and this is a modern car. Same thing. Do the front, do the box, do both sides of the box. So this is where people usually cheat. Please draw the other side of the box, even if it confuses you. You need to draw both sides of it so you feel like you understand where the box begins and ends. And the same with this one. Draw it through, even if it's a little confusing, you'll find a way to kind of make sense of your marks, even if you have to do that. Sometimes I like to remind myself where this ends, so I do little balls, and that's a pretty good strategy. Then you have the wedge, and now I've got this basic shape that looks like the old car. Now, with a modern car, you got to get rid of the edges, which I don't like, but that's the way it is. That's the way these cars are designed. There's no edges now. It's all smooth lines. So after I do this, I would go down like that, and then go over this. With a line that's like this. See, there's no hard edges. It's more, it's being guided by this box, but I'm ending up with something that's not going to have a corner there. It's going to be more like this, which to me looks kind of shapeless, like a wad of bubble gum. But again, that's how these cars are. So now I'm gonna add the tires. And the difference between these cars and the old one, see, it's like that. It's just like a big, smooth kind of shape. And the lights fit on like this. And the trunk is a little bit different. Or the hood, excuse me. So now that I've done this, these pieces stripe it are really important. This is the construction that kind of describes how this is put together in the factory. And you might find this a lot of the times there's a single line that goes down the car. Think about it, you've seen this a gazillion times. A pinstripe, and it goes down and around. And then you have the door. And then you have this. This goes down and through that line. And so this line kind of makes the car hold together. Over here, it's the edge, and I can shade this. And then you really have a very dimensional looking car. But here, it's a lot more round, so you get a very different type of shadow. And there we go, right? So I just basically ironed off all the corners and I got a new car. Now, the wheels, and by the way, let me know if there's anything you need me to go back over. I don't want to get to the wheels if this is going to be losing people. But the wheels fit in like this. You draw a box. Put an X through it. Put a circle around it. And then go over here and do another one. Oh, my device is acting a little bit weird. It's just being slow. But I'm drawing the wheel and I'm waiting for it to catch up with me. Okay, there we go. It's like a time machine. You're seeing something that I drew 45 seconds ago. So there's the sides of the wheel. And from that, I can figure out how to draw a cylindrical wheel. So to get this shape, I draw a box and then I carve it out. And I draw the front of the wheel. And I do this over and over and over again. Notice that the wheel goes way up into the body. This one actually has to be fixed. Oh. I don't know what just happened. Back wheel's still a little bit funny, but I'm just going to live with it. It's close enough. And, you know, the thing is, a car is complicated, but you're going to do this again and again, whatever you're drawing. Really, a stair step is a series of blocks. And a building is just one big block. So I like to draw the car because if you can do this, then you'll really get more comfortable using this block method. So does anybody have any questions? I'd like you to draw this in your own style. Remember, keep the lines parallel. We're not doing fancy perspective. We're doing more of a, yeah, this is what parallel. We're doing more of what of a perspective where the lines actually are not going to ever converge. I'm going to put this picture into chat as well. And I can also put it into mural. How are we doing? Do people have any questions?
Any question?
Miss Cindy, do you have any questions? No?
So I think this is about all we'll have time for. We have about 15 more minutes. You can turn these into mural and you can also upload your homework, but I might not have time to give us full crits on the homework. But these images are now in chat and you should be able to access them. And I'm going to put them up in mural as well.
No, it's not good.
So that's one you have.
I'm not done yet.
Okay, finish it.
我现在很崩溃。
You will always remember.
你可以换一个地方站着吗？
What
你可以换一个地方站着吗？
did she say? No, what did she say?
She wants to stand right there.
No. So if I stand right here, you will do your work. Come on, let's do it.
You can switch like to somewhere else. Instead.
有一分他了，家里这样呢，你 don't
You know how to.
今天我们就想要去结交。你们为什么这样？今日我们这是个正式结交。
By the way, I'm going to show this image really quickly. See this?
对，这个就非常明显。
Look at it, please.
So you see this image? Look at how much it's like our exercise from last night. It's all contour drawing. And then we have these very thick areas with black on them. So that's the way this artist organized this cover. And it's very clear. So the porch and the dirt and the smoke, it's all basically a thin line contour. And then these figures here, they have a much thicker line and there's a lot of shadows on them. So it's a little bit like our exercise from last night. Except instead of there being one thick line element and everything else thin, there's like six elements, you know, all five of the men and the horse. So this is up here now too. If you need to look at for reference. And I'll start to review some of your homework in the last 15 minutes. Good, Selena. Good angling. So, Selena, this is excellent that you angled this. This should be angled too. That's more interesting. I know it's just a little thing. It's just the shoes, but it's so much more interesting. And it always looks like when you do this, it always kind of yells out that it's that was your first thought. But if you took a photo of the world around us, you very rarely do you find somebody posing with their feet perfectly straight, for the viewer. So the feet also, it's a small thing, but that's what I would do. And I think it's an important thing. It's a note that I want everybody in the class to walk away with. It doesn't hurt the drawing, it does help it. But if you feel like, hey, I have a vision of this is the way I want it to be, I promise this is still within the range of your vision. You know, she's already straight, so that's enough parallel lines. But the chances of both of these characters being straight, when in reality, it's a lot more likely that they might be a little bit more like this. Maybe her hands are straight, but her legs are splayed out a little like that. That's a very small curve, but it looks really good. Eagle was really good at this with his last couple pieces, having people that when they sit, their legs might kind of splay like this and like this, which makes it feel more casual, more human, less stiff. So Olive and Selena both did the same image.
Yes.
So, cool. Kind of like two friends collaborating. That's cool. Same note, right? And with yours, let's go the other way. I would have them go this way, or maybe even that, like both ways. To me, this makes the whole image feel a lot more casual. What do you two think? Does this look better to you? Or is this something you think you can consider?
No,
What did they say? Are they saying they're not sure?
it said like they thought like it's fine.
Okay. Cool. And then you remember, I really wanted you to still be exploring the contour. I don't want you to let that go. So Olivia, you've gotten better about this, but I still think I would like you to have your lines connected, because when you connect this, it might cause you to figure out, you know, exactly how this sleeve works. Maybe put a seam on it, maybe put the edge of a pocket here. Maybe make it a little bit thinner too, but and here as well. So I don't want you slipping into these habits. Why a corner? Remember what I said about fabric. You never see the corners on a shape like this. It's always going to be turned down. That's going to be a little bit more naturalistic. But we think as people, because you know that when you got your coat from the factory, that it had a corner, we feel like it shows up when people wear it, but it doesn't. What happens when you wear a coat is that it wraps around. Even this, that's the closest you're going to get to a corner, is maybe there. You're not going to really see a little artificial corner like you would if it was a paper doll. So get rid of that idea. Remember what I said about capes and fabric that is billowing. There's a good chance that if somebody has a cape and it's billowing in space, you don't have this nice, neat corner coming out of it. You usually have one kind of one shape after another. And you're lucky if you see the corners of the image. You usually do not. Because the corner is going to tend to be kind of caught inside of it. Ethan, great job. So Ethan really bringing a lot of effort, a lot of energy, a lot of precision, especially for somebody who came late to the class. This is really good. Really getting in there and doing the double lines, making these things very articulate. And I love this background. Well done. Nice thick line here. Nice thin line here. Very, very good. Good sense of the buildings as well. Maybe Second, there we go. Maybe right here, this could have a double line. Even if it's just like way down here. That makes it feel more like an architectural element. But I love this. Maybe here too. Cool. Do you have any questions for me, Ethan? All right, I'm not seeing any questions in chat. I'm just gonna. Does Ethan have any questions or response?
Just said no.
Okay. How did you like doing the assignment, Ethan? And how many hours did you spend on this? How long did this take you?
30 minutes.
It took him 30 minutes, like he just said that.
What? No.
It no,
Okay.
he just
Okay, cool. You're fast. I love it. Good. One more note. This is verging on being a tangent line right here. That goes down. I like that you broke that, but it might make sense to break it even higher. Have it fade out. And that can separate this a little bit more. It's coming dangerously close to reaching it, pushing into this guy. So when I do this, it falls back more. And that's because to make something read as if it's a, a different form, you want to be careful that they jut out and they're kind of placed like that. See, that makes it feel a lot more like these figures are closer. So you got to resolve that. And that's something I talked about a lot the first week. It's called a run-on tangent line. But I'll probably get a chance to talk about that more. And it's just what it looks like. It's like the times that, you have somebody walking and there's a flagpole behind them. And all of a sudden, the flagpole just runs right into the sleeve. And you can't really tell like where that line begins and where the sleeve ends. So that's a little bit like one of those moments. That's a tangent. And the trick is to place it so that the shoulder juts in more. That's better. Or it could be, you could blacken this so it separates more or make it wider or something. So we want to pay a lot of attention to how shapes interact when they touch. I'm probably gonna have to finish the rest of these crits tomorrow. Except this is good, except for this. No. Okay, so you got to do the box, right? And you line up the top of the box with the top like this. And then you cut this out of it, and then you turn into a wheel. And I can tell that you skipped it because the wheels look like they're out of sync with the car. So you take that line and you go down, and that line, and then you take this line and you line that up with this. You try to make it match this guy. And then you draw the wheels and you go over, and then this line also lines up with this and this. So it takes some work, but it's really going to pay off. Also, it's in the wrong spot, isn't it? Let's move that wheel all the way over here. It's like I said in my lecture, you don't want the front wheel in the middle of the door, and you don't want the back wheel in the middle of the door either. Might be a little bit further back. Then you do the wheel, circle, edge, and now you've got wheels that really tuck up into the car. Good, closer. I think this was easier for you. Nice. Okay, so this is good too, except not so thick. Remember, the trick, this is why it's challenging. You got to make this as thin as this. So go here, and then you got, unless it's a tank, which could be cool, you know, like a militarized vehicle with like would be cool. But if it's a real car, then you're going to do this, and this is going to go right to the edge. So I'd bring that line over. Other than that, you did really good. Thinner frame. And then again, figure out the wheel. So pretend it's another square, just like this panel. Put an X through it, put the wheel there, and cut out the wheel out of the shape. That line's wrong because it's got to line up with this, so it's going to be the same angle as that. Beautiful. Whose is this?
Who's this? Kathy?
Kathy, good. Really good design, very personal. Maybe a little bit more texture right here. So remember when I was doing my drawing and I talked about doing dotted lines? If we do this, then the pole looks more like it's metal or it's been thumbed over and it's a little bit uneven. Look at that. That makes it look a lot more beautiful. So don't forget the dots. And think about other places you can add them as well. This, I'm not going to complain about this. I like it. You know, it's a little bit skinny, especially at the hand. And I mean, I probably would have done this more like this, a little bit of a thicker line that has more dimension. Going over this 3 times like that. If you want it to be black, then go over it like 3 times. And that has a little bit more dimension. But really, the best thing to do would have been to draw it like that. But, you know, listen to me. I don't know if this matters. It's a good image. I'm only noticing this after I really look at it. But yeah, I would like people to think about doing these skinny shapes, retaining that contour energy and getting even more specific. Maybe the wires kind of going around this like that. And then I would go in and clean this up. Tie everything together. Go back and connect my lines. Make more double lines. Connect it. Redraw this carefully. And we have a very specific looking mic that really looks dimensional. Then I can make this black if I want. Cool. Whose is this?
Bonus.
So make the line parallel, put the box on it, draw the boxes just like they're a part of the car. Find the X. And then try to do an arc that's like kind of guided by the X. You can even do a triple line like that. It makes it easier to find the wheel.
Legal, I put a new one in front of you. Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. David.
You see what I did? It's just, it's good. It's a little bit uneven. I want you to, and it's not that mine's perfect, but it's in the ballpark. And remember this and this line up and this and this. And again, you want to do that. Now, you don't very often find cars that have this. So I would take this all the way over, but a lot of people make this mistake, but this isn't very hard to fix. You just bring it over there. Who did I skip? Are there, oh, okay, let's look at this one. Holy cow. Wow. Whose is this?
Jessica.
It's digital, right, Jessica?
Yeah.
It's really good. I really like this weird gray you chose. It almost looks like marker. Wonderful hands. Good body language. Love the face here. You can see where we're losing the hair. And there's the collar, right? And I don't see the other side of the collar. So we want to see that. And then if the hair is going to come down here, then have it, have it go over the dress. But it might make more sense to have the hair over the shoulder. But I really like that hair. And this is good too. Good. It feels like it's not quite finished, so keep going with it, but I really like where it's going. And the sense of perspective is excellent. Awesome. This one is by, who's this again? Warna? Cece. Really cool. Great detail. So Cece, what do you think I'm going to say?
No.
Even more double lines. So it's good, but this one could have had a double line right there and right there.
Okay.
Just keep on looking for them. But I love this pipe. Maybe this one could like really go into the body, and even this, I wonder if that could have a double line. But you're definitely on track with like really understanding the system and trying to make it work. Oh yeah, I like that. It looks more dimensional. Here too, keep looking. I think you have this bit here. It's going to go in and over. That also really helps it. So keep on searching for the vocabulary that you want, what you're trying to say about these buildings. Now, this spot, you kind of lost it a little bit, right? Like right there. So I feel like this should be like a wedge. Like this should be a little edge that somebody could sit in.
Yeah.
Like a little platform. Maybe even, but then this contradicts it here. So it'd either have to be like that, or we'd have to change this window. But I see you losing it right there where you're not really sure what you're drawing, and that's normal. But if we rearrange this a little bit, that could start to look, sorry, I'm having trouble with my little tool. How do I get this to go smaller? Why is this so huge? Gotta be a way to make that go smaller. Oh, well, I'll just do it this way. I would do that. So I want you to keep on playing with these shapes and try to make sense of them. Try to follow the double line and keep on constructing the shape out of space.
Okay.
Yeah. This works. This works if it's a little ledge, but also you could just, let's see, you got this corner. Yeah, I guess that's what we gotta do. Or this could be the bottom of this building, and that would work too.
有可能说我躺中间
Yeah.
做不了，放开。
That also works. It doesn't really make sense, but it looks really cool. And so now it's like, that's the bottom and it's tilting up a little bit. I think that's a really cool shape. What do you think?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Awesome.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
晚安。
We're over time, but I want to see if there's anybody else I skipped. Is there anything over on the left that I didn't get to? If I did, I apologize and I'll get to it tomorrow. So finish these car images. You know, it could be fun to add a figure in there as well, but we'll get to the rest of what I'm trying to teach you tomorrow. So everybody have a good day. Have a good day. I'm gonna go.
Bye.
And,
Good night.
thank you so much for your attention. See you tomorrow. Bye. Thank you.
Okay, lunch.
Oh.
Have a good lunch.